G'day guys, I'm Ross from the Composites Shop. Welcome back. This is episode 2 of our Surf Kayak Build. This episode we're going to gel coat, we're going to laminate, and then we're going to demould the hull of our mega surf kayak. I hope you enjoy it, guys. Stay tuned, there's plenty to come. Okay, let's take a step back. Basically, once you get your moulds out of storage, then you need to prepare them for obviously for gel coating and then for glassing. It's very important that you store them reasonably correctly, particularly ones that are going to be in use a lot like this one here has. Over the years, I've pulled a number of boats out of this one and it's been a really good mould. It is an older style mould. If you have a look at it, there's no flange on here. So I can't offer this particular model in a vacuum infused version, but I can do a vacuum bagged version, which are two very separate things. We're going to discuss that as we go through the series. So a good wipe down with denatured alcohol. Make sure you remove all the surface dust and any small parts of plasticine or any remnants of gel coat that might have been on there from the previous laminate that you've done on it. But, you know, as long as you keep them out of the sun, there's no real need to keep polishing them. But I give them a good clean. Now, let that flash off. Now, denatured alcohol and methylated spirits has an additive in it that makes it particularly distasteful to drink. Obviously, it's a fairly cheap alcohol. That has like a powdery substance and it's almost like a light film that will be left on the surface. That does need to be removed. So you need a dry cloth to then remove the residue. And that's really important that you do that because your waxes, your release waxes and your PVAs and all the things that you might use on a mold like such as this needs to really have a clean surface to adhere to and then to be obviously removed to provide you with the best release at the end of your product lamination. One thing I find absolutely vital in my shop here, and I'll just move back here, you can see I have these 3 fluoro lights running across the top here. However, down the back there, I do have one of those new LED lights. It's about a 2400 lumen. I think it's only 20 watts in LED, but it throws a good light, and side lights are often more important than the top light. And by having a side light, you can actually see any imperfections in your mold. And you can see here, this mold is around about 15 years old, so it's still going and has a few little marks on it. And just remember, whatever mark is on your mold is going to then transform onto the gel coat that you put on. So the cleaner and the nicer your molds are, obviously the better your product's going to be. But you can see there, just having that side light enables me to be able to see my imperfections a lot better. So as far as mold releases go, I've used a number of different products over the years, and I've settled on this one. It's actually TR mold release. It's a high temperature mold release. It means that it can handle the high exothermic heat that is going to be generated by a solid laminate like this. Now this boat here is around 4 to 5 layers in thickness with a core in it. So that means that I'm going to be generating quite a substantial amount of heat. Now there's a general rule when laminating by hand that you don't ever lay down any more than 1800 grams of material per square meter. Now that's very important, and that is you know, pretty much a rigid thickness that will give you around about 2 or 3 millimeters of laminate. In this case, I'm going to be laying down less than 1000 grams of laminate, but I'm also going to be incorporating a core into it, which is around about a 1 millimeter core mat. And the idea of that is I'm just getting that little bit of rigidity under the seat section, which is right in the center of the mold here. So importantly, use a high temperature wax, not just any old wax, not just any old car polish or anything. It needs to be a properly formulated piece of chemistry that's going to work with your laminate. So TR products pretty much worldwide available. I'm not sure where they come from, but I love them. Now, contrary to popular belief, you don't need a lot of wax. The important thing is you do several layers rather than one, you know, hell of a lot of wax down, because you're only wasting product. Or you're better off to put a couple of thin layers on than to bloody copiously and liberally put the stuff on. So what I do is I just make sure my cloth is reasonably saturated with wax, and then I wipe it on and let it sit for around 10 to 15 minutes. I want all that gases and chemical reaction to happen so that it rises to the surface, and then I can just screw it off with a good polishing cloth. Now care needs to be taken waxing around here. Why is that? Because I have a small radius here. I do not, under any circumstances, want mould release to touch the side of that fin box, because that's actually going to become integrated into the hull itself. So it's essential that you give yourself a little bit of a margin. You can see here I'll go like 5 millimeters or sort of 1/4 of an inch away from the actual surface of that fin box. Again, over here I'll do the same thing, and then I'll come back and I'll just run it very, very carefully along here, because I don't want to get any wax on that, because if I do that, then it's actually, there's a good chance that is not going to take to the gel coat, and then it'll pull out. You'll notice there's some small, I'll show you in a moment, there's some small little recesses in here that actually clutch the gel coat, and that's the idea of it, is that it actually holds that in place to ensure that it is, you know, physically part of the monocoque structure that I'm trying to achieve here. Okay, so the mould's been prepped. It's one of the things that all of us as laminators and fiberglass fabricators hate, is having to, you know, polish moulds. It's just the one we hate to do, but you got to do it. You find yourself, you're covered in the stuff. You can see I've always got a white patch on my chest where I wipe my hands on. But yeah, again, you can't do enough preparation. It's so important. It is the absolute essential part of this whole game. It is looking after your moulds. If you look after them, you're going to get a decent product out of it. Right, so I can't stress enough the importance of using fresh material. I was always guilty, and you can see by my pile of 20 litre, 20 kilo tins behind me here, of buying a 20 kilo pot of black gel coat. Might use half of that in the time that would be recommended to use it, i.e. 3 month window for gel coat. Really, really important. I always now buy as I need it. There's nothing worse than spending 200 bucks on a tin of really beautiful gel coat, and within 4 or 5 months I know that I can't use it on anything other than my own projects. I can't certainly put it into a product that is going out onto the shelf to be sold in a store or for a customer order. And the reason why that is because the chemical starts to change, and it's only guaranteed for around 3 months here in Australia, because we are dealing with some pretty high ambient temperatures. In here today I've waited to gel coat this mould up right till it hit around about 20 degrees, and it's 20 in here now, so it's optimum time for gel coating. I use a brush gel on the Surf Kayak product. Now the reason why I do that, and I'll try to show you some vision here of us launching these things. When we launch a Surf Kayak, we actually sit on the sand, put the spray deck on, and then we shuffle out on our bum a bit like a dog with worms. Now the reason why we do that is because if we were to jump in the boat in deep water, there's a good chance it's going to fill with water, sink, going to take it back to shore, empty it out. So we sit on the sand, get the spray deck on where we're reasonably dry, and then we shuffle out. Just as we're touching the water, we can get some water under us and get on our way. So we need it slightly thicker than I would like to apply it with a spray gun. Now when I put spray gel on, it tends to be a lot thinner material. It has less thickener, less talc or whatever they put in it. I imagine it's some sort of a talc to thicken the resin. And as a result, I'm going to end up with a lot of wear and tear on the bottom of these surf kayaks. Now, by using brush gel, I can guarantee that I'm going to get a slightly thicker product without getting too thick that it's going to be brittle. The hull of this boat will have around about 1.2 kilos of gel coat on it. Now, that is a pretty standard that I work with every time that I do it. It's pretty much the same for every boat. They're all around the same surface area of hull, and that's a reasonable amount of weight. Now, shaking's not enough. You need to stir as well. As much as you're thinking shaking's a great thing, and I tend to like to let my tins sit upside down for a few hours before I use them, and that way I know that the stuff that's settled in the bottom there over the last month when the thing was made, and I record the batch numbers, so if ever I have an issue, and often the date's on the batch, but shaking really isn't enough. You want to make sure all of the material, the styrene and the resin and the thickener is all blended perfectly in to make sure that it gets back into solution, and then you're going to get the chemical reaction that it's designed and formulated to do. Now I use these ice cream containers. Now I'm not eating a lot of ice cream these days. I've decided that avenue of pleasure has been permanently closed off both by myself and my wife. As we get older, we can't eat this stuff. Okay, so we've got a tin of really nice gel coat. Now you'd never ever use the tin to catalyse into because you can't, quite frankly, you can't mix it properly. So we're going to pour it in here. Now I know that was 1 kilo. So then all I need to do is get another 0.2 of a kilo or another 200 mils into this pot. I know I've got the exact amount that I need for that. The application of gel coat's a very important component of making any fiberglass product, particularly one that has a cosmetic finish on the outside. In this case, the gel coat is catalysed at 2%. You should never catalyse at any higher than a 2% of volume of the actual material you're putting down. You'll see here I'm working around the fin boxes. It takes a lot of brush work to get these correctly gel coated and making sure that I have no air bubbles around that radius that I formed earlier on. I'll then spread the gel coat evenly across the mould, and you'll notice that I'm actually doing very long and consistent brush strokes whilst applying this to the mould. It's such an important fact that if you do a long and low-angled brush stroke, you'll end up with a much better finish, and you can see any ridges or raised sections quite closely as you perform the gel coating process. Now the last part of this is to give it a quick check over and ensure that you haven't got any bubbles or any gassing of the gel coat, and then I go around the edges with my brush and just ensure that I have enough material there. There really isn't a need at any point, provided you're putting the right amount of gel coat down, to apply it twice. And then ultimately the wash up here is very important as well. As immediately after gel coating, I will paint out the excess gel in my brush onto a piece of cardboard, and then I'll rinse it in acetone and squeeze the excess gel coat out of that brush, and then ultimately give it a good clean out. So just taking a look at the way this is all gelled up, you can see here that I've actually applied quite a lot of gel coat around these fin boxes, and most of those slots and everything are now filled, and that will add to the strength of the fin boxes when I go to demold. With this one here, we want to make a lamination in one chemical sitting rather than doing a tire layer and coming back tomorrow and doing the balance. So the preparation of cloths is very important as well. The first layer of this kayak is 300 C.S.M against the gel coat, one layer of 265 woven roving, which is what I'm cutting here, and then a layer of Lantor core mat, which is a 2mm core mat, which is actually incorporated into the hull, then another layer of 265 woven roving, and then a final layer of 200 gram carbon, a standard weave, and I'm going to outline these as we go along. All right, it's about 2 hours since I gel coated this. Now a really good way to check whether or not it's ready is to just run your finger over it, just very lightly, and if you end up with any residue, it's not ready. Do it on a place that's not going to be seen, or is on the fin box here where it's going to be inside the boat, but that is now ready to go. You don't want to be touching it too much because you don't want to introduce any contaminants to it, but that is now ready to go, and I'm ready to start laminating cloth. So yeah, a couple of things to remember. Just remember that you've got a good tacky surface. You don't want to be putting any dust or anything on this, so you don't want to leave it overnight where moisture or dust and everything can settle. You want to try to do it on the same day. Another good reason to keep a fan blowing over it is to keep the stuff away from it, particularly insects and things. We don't want insects settling in it either, so lots to think about. So our first layer here is 300 chopped strand matting. Now it forms an ideal tire layer without actually allowing for a print through. Now what print through is a visible sign of the cloth actually pushing through the gel coat and visible from the outside. So given that I've brushed the gel coat onto this particular hull, it's very rare that you'd have a print through come through a brushed gel coat finish. But you can see here how I'm trimming the cloth after applying a small amount of resin, and I'm trimming it with around about a 1-inch apron. And the reason why I do that is because any larger than 1 inch or so of excess over the edge will actually form too much weight, and then it'll actually bridge, which is essentially you're forming an air gap around the hull side, and we don't want that. And ultimately you can sort of avoid that by trimming it regularly. Economy is very important too, so I'll use one piece and I'll then trim very close to it and then use the remainder for the stern of the boat here. So by trimming this around in this fashion, I tend to be a bit more economical with my use of cloth, and I'm able to consolidate this cloth down effectively just with a simple paint roller, and then working from the inside halfway across the hole, I'll work out to the outside, pushing any air to the outside edge, and then I'll deal with the remainder in that radius on the edge of the hull sides. It's really important that you work carefully with the fin roller. You don't need to drive it hard, and you certainly don't want to be doing it too quickly. By doing it quickly, you can actually instigate bubbles into your laminate. So the slower and more methodical you are at this stage, this is probably one of the more important layers of the whole hull. So the slower and the more effective you can do it, the better. The stern of the boat around the fin boxes is a challenge. I'll apply resin to the hull, and anywhere where you've got a raised item like a fin box, leave your C.S.M on there for a moment, wet it out, just get it wet. Do not brush like effectively you need to stipple with your brush rather than stroke, and then let it sit there for a minute and let the resin, the styrene in the resin, break down the bonding agent within the fibres, and it ultimately will almost take shape on its own without you having to do too much. But it does require a little bit of brushwork around these areas such as fin boxes as well. But again, this is mainly a tie layer. We call it a tie layer where it is actually, or a skin coat, where it's actually bonding the gel coat to the first layer, and one of the most important layers of any laminate. So our second layer is a woven roving. It's a 265 gram, 90 degree and 0 degree access cloth. You'll notice here I'm actually laying the cloth down from the center and outwards, and then using a dry brush to sort of pat it down prior to adding any resin. Now, there should be sufficient resin in the C.S.M in the first layer for you to be able to lay it down without adding any excess, but it's very important that you don't add too much resin to a woven roving, because you can end up with a brittle substrate if you put in too much resin. You'll notice also that it's because it's 90 degree and 0 degree access, it doesn't conform that well to items such as our fin boxes on this particular one. So a little bit of trimming with the scissors and a couple of pleats and some cuts to enable this to take the shape of the actual fin box is required. So this is the part of the boat that does take quite a lot of time, and dealing with this is probably the most important part, because you want that adhering of the resins and the cloths to the sides of the fin box more so than the top, to ensure that it holds them in place within the structure of the fin box. Now, so I will spend around about half an hour to 40 minutes doing these fin boxes with the woven roving, and then I'll add more resin and then use my consolidating fin roller again, working from the center outwards to ensure that the air bubbles are pushed to the outside, then dealing with the margins of the hull on their own. Our third layer is a 2mm Lantor core mat. Now, this is actually a microsphere filled polyester cloth, which actually has fibre in it, which acts as a bulking agent and ensures that I get the distance in between my two laminates that is required around the seating area. You'll notice here it's about 500mm in length, and that will absorb around 600 grams of resin. Now, to achieve this sort of thickness with a solid laminate, I'd probably be putting down around about 1 kilo or 1.5 kilos of resin for the similar type of substrate. So really an effective way of bulking without actually adding too much weight. And then layer 4 to form the sandwich with my core mat and to provide an extra layer of reinforcement on the actual hull is a layer of 265 gram woven roving again. Once again, there's quite a bit of pleating and brushwork and cutting around the fin boxes and trimming required around the edge of the hull. So I'm forming quite a substantial laminate here, and that's 4 layers. Now by this stage you're actually generating quite a bit of heat in the exothermic reaction, but similarly we're actually laminating quite a lot down in one process here, so it's actually becoming quite a stiff laminate as it stands. And again, forming the laminate is very important to use a dry brush and just get this stuff down straight, because the structure of the actual boat relies on the axis of the weave as well, and that's something very important to remember whenever you're laying anything with a bias as well. So there's all these things you need to consider when you're laying out your laminates. Now the final layer is a layer of 200 gram single weave carbon, and this is an absolutely beautiful material to work with. You'll notice here that I've used a dry brush just to first lay it down, ensuring that all of my weaves are dead straight. And once again, because it's a 90 degree and a 0 degree axis, it's actually not going to conform to those fin boxes, so I'm going to be required to do a little bit of scissor work once again. And then you can see me applying a little bit of resin here. Now you don't want to go too heavy with the resin, but it does take a little bit of time to get this consolidated down into that final layer with the fin roller. One thing I will warn you about is adding too much resin to these substrates, and the most important part is when you're trimming the substrate is be careful of remnant carbon landing back on the job. You'll find that you can get a much more cosmetic and more beautiful finish if you don't have bits of carbon floating around and landing back on the job. So it must be removed by hand to ensure that you get a good clean finish. The one thing that I do once I reach this final layer is I then consider where I'll be laminating into the future, and that is often down the center of the hull here. There is a foam pillar that intersects down the center of this particular hull where the paddler's legs will be on each side. So I'll then peel ply that area to ensure that I'm going to get a really good adhesion with the adhesive I'm going to use, and then I'll do around the seams, because ultimately this is going to be joined to a deck. So this peel ply application is vital to make sure that I get a really good uniform and smooth finish, and allows for a really positive bond onto the actual deck itself. So plenty of work to be done here in this section, and lots of detail, and once again I think around about 2 hours. Right, so I'm getting towards the end of this laminate. This is all carbon reinforced. It's not an all carbon deck, it's carbon reinforced, and I'm just at the back end of it now. And yeah, it's been exactly 1 hour and 55 minutes. I generally knock them over in 2 hours, and I'm pretty much on time at the moment. So I've just got to do a little bit of trimming, a little bit of brushwork, and back into it. So the key is meticulous work, brushwork, and just take your time and you'll get a good result. So once you've finished all the laminating and the consolidating of the fabrics into one laminate, the peel ply is an essential part of the finished product. It adds an area where you can actually join the hull and the deck, and there I'm putting a piece in for the center foam pillar. But more importantly, wherever carbon or carbon Kevlar overlaps, you should always put a piece of peel ply. What that will do is actually reduce any of the fine needles and sharp edges that will be caused by the raised sections of carbon. So don't forget to do that. Okay, that's 2.5 hours without a time for a wee, but you know, it would be tempting now to go home and have a beer. That's typically what most would do. It'll be knock-off time. Not in the composites game. We still have work to do here. I'm waiting now for this to be trimmable with a Stanley blade. What I don't want to do is have to come in tomorrow and use a grinder or a multi-tool to trim the excess off this mould. Now, if I had to go somewhere, if I had to be somewhere, then that'd be the case. But right now, I'm waiting for this just to go off enough, and it's pretty much there. It's about a 5 to 10 minute window that you get where you can get a Stanley blade and you can basically saw that apron that you can see sticking up there. Very important that we do this, because then it firstly makes demoulding a lot easier, and secondly, it basically gives me my hull trimmed down to the mould edge and ready to fabricate onto the deck. It's a beautiful carbon boat. It's got still a lot of work to be done on it, but it is looking pretty nice. Carbon reinforced Surf Kayak hull done. So yesterday afternoon, I laminated this carbon reinforced Surf Kayak hull, and I'll basically always leave it overnight to cure. There's no point in trying to demold something on the same day unless you've got like a 40-degree day, you've got an autoclave oven where you can whack it in and force cure it. And essentially, you don't want it green or sort of just a few hours old before you demold it, because you may well delaminate something that hasn't quite cured. You don't really know what's going on in here, especially under 5 layers of laminate. So I leave it overnight, give it at least sort of 12 to 18 to 24 hours to settle. It's almost 24 hours since I laid it up. So to demold this hull, it is a difficult one to demold. I've come up with a bit of a technique which is great, because you've got to remember that I've got those fin boxes glued down with that double-sided tape down in the back of that mold there. So it's going to need some way of actually releasing. So the first part of demolding is to find yourself some gloves. There's nothing worse than going to demold something and you slice your finger. And I mean, I've almost lost my finger to the edge of a glass laminate like this. So important to firstly find yourself some good sort of cut-proof gloves, things that will handle a Stanley blade going over the top, because that's essentially what you're running your bare fingers along. That's rule number one. Second thing is, don't ever use anything sharp. I have a wooden spatula that I use for everything. It's called the Woody, and it's just a simple to a 1.5 inch wide paint scraper that I've dulled the edge off with some wet and dry sandpaper, and that's taken that sharp edge off it, and it's brilliant for working its way in between the mould and the laminate. So that's rule number 2, no sharp objects. Things like tongue depressors, plastic paint stirrers are great, wedges, there's a whole range of stuff. It must be wood or plastic, or if it must be metal, it must be dulled off and polished off so that it's nice and smooth. Now, you remember yesterday I was talking about green trimming and how we're able to trim this along this line. You'll notice here I've got a very defined edge between the mould. The white is the whole gel coat, and obviously the laminate. So I need to find that section there with my thin spatula in a place that's easy to lift out. A couple of spots over here. Now, if I was really meticulous, I'd probably sand the top down, but I find that the more sanding I do, if I sand this down exactly level, and it's pretty clean as it is, but if I was to sand that right down, I could in fact damage the surface of or the edges of my mould, and then I'm going to end up with 4 or 5 boats down the line. I haven't actually got an edge left because I've sanded it down. So we really want to make sure that I get this product out cleanly without damaging anything. You can see here, I don't know whether you can actually focus on it, but you can see the core mat that I've put in there is actually substantially thicker. It's probably 3 or 4 millimeters thick here, whereas it's only around about 1 or 2 down in here. Okay, so I've got my my paint scraper, and I'm going to simply, and I'm just looking for any sort of little raised section. There we go, and there's a spot there. You notice I've just been able to get him in. Oh yes, so there we go. So that is now in place. Now this is the point where it could become, you can get a little bit over enthusiastic and gouge away at it. The trick is, flex it out a bit and get your wooden tongue depressor in, or your popsicle stick, or whatever you guys like to call them. And then simply, because I've got gloves on, I can run my hands around it. Now, there's going to be stuff flying everywhere, but you can see here I've started to demold the product, and you can see it's actually lifted away. Doesn't hurt to always leave one in place somewhere, so when I come back to go that way, I've already got one in place here. So it doesn't hurt to have a pair of glasses on too, because as you demold, bits of gel coat and glass are flying into the air. So you can see that there's a bit of carnage. But yeah, I've pretty much demolded this with a paddle pop stick. This is really simple stuff, but you know, and again, I'm going to leave one in place as I work my way towards the back of the boat. Remember the fin boxes I fitted a couple of days ago, that area is highly rigid, plus I've got core mat in here, so it's probably twice as stiff as this part. So there's a good chance you're gonna wreck the end of your stick. So start again with a fresh one. Don't go putting a damaged stick down in the air, because ultimately it's going to end up with more polishing when you're done at the end. So here we go, get ourselves in here, and yeah, this is coming out really well. This is how you do it, nice and simply. Now, I'm not saying that all molds are this easy. This one has had quite a lifetime. But, you know, there we go. I've now gone around there with 3 sticks. Now that I've run my paddle pop stick, or my popsicle stick, all the way around the product, I now need to relieve the bottom. Now underneath there, because the edges were primarily the part holding it in, and if I've done all my release wax correctly, it should technically lift off. The problem we're going to have in here is as well, we're going to have a lot of static in there, and there is almost a vacuumal action holding that down to the mold. So with flat items like this, tabletops, bench tops, anything like that, I find a piece of seatbelt webbing like this. Now you see this here, it's covered in plasticine. Where do you think that came from? That stuff is essentially what's on the fin boxes. But what we're going to do, we're going to feed it from the bow, and I'm going to pull it underneath it. It's flat, it's not going to do any harm to the hull, and it will demold it pretty effectively without any brute force. So I'm going to find my position up here again. So you can see here, it's already separated, it's like a duck bill. And then I'm going to lay my seatbelt webbing in it, all the way through it. I do this channel with like one phone and a GoPro, so you know, if you think I've got like 50 cameras set up, you'd be wrong. It's just too hard to keep on top of the battery management, if anything. But okay, so I've got the seatbelt webbing draped through underneath. It's about 1/3 of the way already. So what I can now do, clean up all this stuff, begin to pull that through on both sides. Again, no force, nice and gentle. This could be a car bonnet. This could be a tabletop. It could be anything. All right, we've got it to here. Now I've got a problem. Remember, right here, here and here, I've got items stuck down to the mold. Now that's going to create a little bit of an issue for me, because I've got a hell of a lot of pressure holding on the mold. I'm trying to leave it off the mold. So the next thing you're going to do is pull the mold back to me a bit. Sorry. All right, now that tape is now, or that webbing is now abutting against these fin boxes, i.e. the plasticine and the double-sided tape. And rip my t-shirt, put myself against it, get hold of both sides of the tape and pull. Now, when I first started demolding stuff, I used to near on kill myself. I'm going to show you some vision now of me getting a module for my catamaran off its mold. This thing was 10 feet high, 12 foot long, and it took me all day, whereas these days I like to take it nice and easy. So I've now demolded that, because that's passed all the way through there. It's simply a matter of lifting it out. There was no real effort involved. I've protected my hands, I've protected my eyes, and I haven't even raised the sweat, whereas before I used to be laying on the floor for an hour to get over a demolding incident like that. So if I can tell you anything, guys, that's the trick. The easier it is, the better your product's going to be, and the better your recovery is going to be at the end of the day. I've got that demolded. I'm going to have a bit of mess to clean up under here, but there's a guarantee that it's out of the mold. And there we have it. The carbon reinforced Surf Kayak Hull. Whoa. And you know, I've been doing this for a long time. Nothing beats that feeling when you pull it out and it's perfect. Excellent. Well, that's it for this episode, guys. We've finished the hull, we've demolded it, and next episode we're going to start working on the deck. Now, the deck's the part that everyone sees on the beach, so we're going to make that look fantastic with some really special color combinations, and we're going to work on some techniques that are really going to set this boat off and make it a truly unique product. So don't forget to join me, and don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Click those notifications wherever that bell is, and you'll catch up with our next episode on the Composites Shop. So thanks for joining me, guys, and I'll see you next time.